Hello, Explorer. Welcome along. You've stumbled upon the smartest show in the solar system, and it's time to take a look around. Welcome to the Fun Kids Science Weekly. My name is Dan. We're about to make loads of discoveries. This week we're diving into ducks. Have you ever watched them gliding across a pond effortlessly, and you've thought, how on earth are they doing that? Why aren't they sinking? Well, we'll find out.
It's mainly the oil gland. So when you see them preening and sitting on the side and rubbing their feathers and pulling at their wings, that's what they're doing. They're spreading that oil all around their body to help keep them afloat.
In our Battle of the Sciences this week, we'll try and discover what your pet is actually thinking about you.
Right now, the really exciting thing I'm looking at, and I'm teaching my students about, is sort of the emotional life of animals. And the fact that animals are fundamentally experiencing the world often in the same way that we are. So they have thoughts, feelings, fears, lots of other emotions.
And for our Dangerous Dan, we're learning about one creature that uses another creature as a weapon. It's coming up in a brand new Fun Kids Science Weekly. Let's start with your science in the news. Scientists have found new but very tentative evidence that a faraway world orbiting another star might be home to life. A team from Cambridge University have been studying the atmosphere of a planet called K2-18b, very catchy. They've detected signs of molecules which on Earth are only made by organisms. Now, this is the second time chemicals associated with life have been detected in this planet's atmosphere by NASA's James Webb Space Telescope, so that must be a good sign, right? We've seen two different things that point towards life, and one of them can only be made by life. At least that's what's happening here on Earth. I can't wait to discover more. Also, a colossal squid has been filmed in its natural environment for the first time since the species was discovered a century ago. The 30-centimetre long creature was caught on camera at a depth of 600 metres near the South Sandwich Islands, near the South Atlantic Ocean. I've suddenly got very hungry. A team of scientists recorded the footage around a month ago. They were down there, they were around for 35 days trying to find new marine life, and they saw this colossal squid for the first time. They caught it on camera. Now, it can grow up to 7 metres long. It can weigh half a tonne. It's the heaviest invertebrate on the planet. Here's something really cool. The mollusk was pictured on the 100-year anniversary of it first being identified, found, and named. I love that symmetry that you find sometimes in science. And for our final story this week, let's discuss, one of the biggest science stories in a little while. You might have seen this. Pop star Katy Perry and 5 other women safely returned to Earth after reaching space aboard Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin rocket. Let's find out why this might be quite important with Dr. Kate Pattle from UCL. Kate, thank you for being there. So why has this made such talk and big fuss around it this week?
It's not very often that you get a crew that's entirely women going to space. And also it's really showing how, if you're a pop star at least, space is becoming accessible. You don't need to be a fighter pilot anymore to get beyond the top of the atmosphere.
This was 6 women, and you had Katy Perry, you had Jeff Bezos's partner, there were TV news anchors and some other really important people who had worked for NASA before. So it's quite a range of, let's be fair, probably quite wealthy people, but it's quite important that it was 6 women, yes?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, it's important to remember that there have been women in space ever since spaceflight started. So the first woman in space was actually a Russian, Valentina Tereshkova, in 1963. But there have been many astronauts from the US and Britain and many other countries as well as women behind the space program from the very beginning. You know, for example, there was Katherine Johnston, who calculated the trajectories that took the Apollo missions to the moon. She was also an African-American woman at a time when that was very difficult to manage at NASA. And also Margaret Hamilton, for example, who programmed the computers that had the flight software for the Apollo missions. So, I mean, it's wonderful just that this highlights how integral women are to spaceflight in the past and the present and will be in the future.
So they were up there, I think the complete journey was around about 11 minutes, and they did, well, I thought they made it into space. Some very smart scientists are saying, nah, maybe not. What do you think? Did they made it? Are they astronauts?
They made it to what's formally considered the beginning of space. So there's no very hard point at which you can say, right, now we're not in space, now we are. But internationally, the boundary of space is what's called the Kármán line, 100 kilometres above the surface of the Earth. And they did reach that point. So according to the definitions, that does, if you get beyond the Kármán line, you're an astronaut. So yes, they all are astronauts.
And 100 kilometres up, that's a nice round number. Is that scientific, or did we just kind of pluck that from thin air?
I mean, thin air quite literally, right? It's a little bit of both. It is scientific in that it's the point at which, you really are starting to get into the very, very upper layers of the atmosphere. 100 kilometres isn't a hard and fast line. It's where we've chosen internationally for the boundary between space and the atmosphere to be. Everest is maybe 8.8 kilometres high, so it's significantly higher than the highest point you could get to on the land. But then the moon is 380,000 kilometres away. So, it is space, but it's our backyard in space terms.
This is Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin rocket. Also, Elon Musk is getting people up to space with SpaceX. I know that Richard Branson is trying his best with Virgin as well. So space tourism looks to be the future. How close in the future do we think that, well, you and I, Kate, who don't have many, many millions of pounds to play around with, might be able to get to space?
Well, it depends how far you want to go, really. I would imagine that the kind of flights we're seeing at the moment could in the next few decades become, if not commonplace, certainly less unaffordable than they currently are. On the other hand, sort of the grander ideas of living on the moon or Mars, I think they're much, much further off than that. There's so many challenges around actually living in space rather than just visiting it for a few seconds that we haven't yet solved.
And, well, Katy Perry and all the other astronauts, they were very excited because it's an all-female craft. They were very excited that this might be really inspiring for girls all around the world. What do you make of that?
I mean, I certainly hope that it is. I think it's wonderful that we have more and more girls getting interested in both science and also engineering, because we need to know how to fly these things. We need to know how to build them, and the more women we have, the better it is. It's
absolutely true. And it's just amazing, isn't it, to see all this noise, and it was kind of over and done within 10 minutes. And I've loved hearing some of the fallout from it. It's been brilliant to chat to you about it as well. Dr. Kate Pattle, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We heard loads about that this week, didn't we? About how important it was that Blue Origin went up to space. So it's really good to just uncover what it means and what it could do for the future too. Thank you very much to Kate. Let's get some of your questions answered then. If you have anything sciencey that you want answered on the podcast, you need to leave it as a voice note for me on the free Fun Kids app and at funkidslive.com. Really easy. Both of those places, there's a big red button. Click it. Let me know who you are and what your question is. That way I can do the digging and I can make you the star of the show. I can't wait to hear from you. We'll start this week with a question sent in from Etta, who wants to know, how does the moon have a different orbit every day? Well, Etta, this is quite a tricky one to answer because there's a lot of strange phenomena that affect the moon's orbit. And actually, it doesn't have a completely different orbit every day, but sometimes things do change. You see, the moon travels around the Earth in an elliptical shape, so it's like an oval, a squashed circle. Now, it does that every 27 days, but because the Earth is also moving around the sun, and because the Earth is turning on its own axis, and because the moon is turning on its own axis, it takes 29 days to return to the same phase, like going from a full moon back to another full moon. And that's why we can track the stages of the moon, full, new, half, through the month. And it's pretty amazing how that happens every 30 days, more or less. Now, the moon sets and rises at different times every day. It appears in a different position in the sky. So that's where the confusion often happens, Etta. Although it does follow the same orbit, mostly around our planet, it looks different because there's so much happening. We're orbiting the sun. we're both spinning, so that's why it looks different in the sky. Thank you very much for your question, Etta. Here's one from Jenny. What do you have?
Hi, I'm Jenny from China, and I would like to know, why can ducks float on water?
Well, Jenny, thank you so much for that question. And here's the amazing thing about it. We've all seen hundreds of ducks. How often do you look at one and think, what's that doing there? How is that bobbing above the water? Why isn't it sinking? Let's find out with Tim Jones from Sally's Duck Rescue. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. So, how can ducks float on water?
That's my pleasure to be here, Dan. There's a couple of sort of key factors of how they can stay afloat. I mean, one of them is their kind of structure. They're very, very lightweight. They have hollow bones, which naturally help with their buoyancy, and they have a series of air sacs in their body which can kind of fill with air and help them stay afloat. However, the main reason is it's actually due to their feathers, and they have a little gland just at the top of their tail. They call it a preen gland, and it secretes like an oil. So if you see a duck preening itself, you'll see him sometimes pop his head back, or her pop their head back, and they rub that oil from the gland on the top of their bill, and they spread that around their feathers, and that gives them a completely waterproof coating. And that is essentially how they stay up. If they didn't have that oil to keep them waterproof, their feathers would get saturated with water, and they would unfortunately sink. So it's mainly the oil gland. So when you see them preening and sitting on the side and rubbing their feathers and pulling at their wings, that's what they're doing. They're spreading that oil all around their body to help keep them afloat.
Whoa! And it just makes you think of the wonders of wildlife and evolution, that this animal has in it the oil that it needs to stay afloat. It's almost magical. Now, we hear quite a lot about the trouble swans seem to have staying afloat, that they're really graceful, but they're pedaling away underneath the water. Is that similar for ducks? How easy do they find it to kind of bob about?
I mean, you will usually see, if you go past a pond, you'll sometimes see that they have no problem whatsoever staying afloat. They will all often sit there on the water, tuck their head under their wing, and just go to sleep. They literally bob around like little boats all day long, without having to do anything really to kind of keep themselves, because they do that preparation with the oil before they get in, and once they're in the water, that's it. They'll bob around. Sometimes they'll sleep on the water for hours.
While I have you, I think we should deal with a myth. I've been told that you're not meant to feed ducks bread. That's what we always take to the pond. You take little bits of bread and you chuck the tiny little scraps of it, and then normally when you're bored at the end, you chuck the entire slice into the pond. Apparently that's not good for them though, Tim.
Actually, that's right. That is actually correct. It is not the best thing for them. It's a little bit doesn't hurt them, but it's not the easiest thing for them to digest. The best thing that you can do, usually down at the supermarkets or a pet shop, is you can buy a floating duck food if you really want to feed the ducks. You can buy like a floating duck food. It's not very expensive. You just get a little box, and you can give them a handful of that, and it's much better for them. The bread is, like I said, it's kind of gloopy and clogs up their digestive system, so it isn't the best thing for them. However, most ducks that I meet will eat anything, and especially if you really want to give them a treat, take a handful of frozen peas with you.
Oh, that's a lovely, lovely nugget of info. Tim, just tell us all about the brilliant work that Sally's Duck Rescue does.
My wife is Sally, and we started a domestic waterfowl rescue a few years ago, and we didn't ever imagine that it would become what it has done today. We've got over 450 birds here, 350 of them are ducks. We have disabled ducks here, ducks that maybe have had to have a leg amputated or a wing removed, and we help them to facilitate them to have their best life. We're a registered charity. We're here in Norfolk, and we do the best that we possibly can for kind of unwanted, elderly and less able ducks, to give them the life that they should be able to have.
When you and Sally started it, what made you think of all the animals that we could help, ducks were the ones that needed your rescue and assistance?
So Sally loves ducks. They're her absolute favourite. I really, really like them as well. I love them to bits. But we we were looking at, there's lots and lots and lots of rescues. There's lots of wildlife rescues that will take kind of all kinds of wildlife. There's lots of cat rescues. There's lots of dog rescues. There's even lots of chicken and cockerel rescues. But the one thing that we found, that there was just no one, if people had an unwanted duck, there was no one anywhere that would be able to take it. So what people would tend to do is they would tend to then go and try and put them out on a pond, maybe down at the park, at the local park or something, and they don't realise just how detrimental to A, the natural wildlife, and B, that particular duck that gets left there is. So that was kind of where it started from, really. We kind of opened our doors to sort of say, please don't dump your ducks at the park. We can take them in, we can help them, if they're injured, and it just kind of grew from there, really.
Well, some fantastic advice there. Frozen peas and don't dump your ducks. It's a brilliant story. And Jenny, thank you for your question. That's how ducks float on water. Tim Jones from Sally's Duck Rescue, thank you for joining us.
No worries. It's a pleasure to be here.
If you have anything sciencey that you want answered on the podcast next week, make sure you leave it as a voice note for me on the free Fun Kids app and at funkidslive.com. We've gone very aquatic this week on the podcast. We heard about ducks just a second ago. We heard about squids earlier on in Science in the News. And for this week's Dangerous Dan, where we look at the most weird, odd, peculiar, deadly and strange things in the universe, we're going back into the ocean to search for a very unique beast that uses another deadly creature as a weapon. Now, to find the blanket octopus, you'll need to head to coral reefs scattered across the sea. Normally found in warmer oceans like the Indo-Pacific, you've got the Great Barrier Reef just off the coast of Australia. They hunt for food and they also hide there. Now, like any octopus, they've got a pod at the top, they've got all their arms, but these ones are linked together with almost a webbed sheet. It's where their name comes from. It looks like a living cape. They sweep it around them, floating a bit like a ghost, and it terrifies predators. Here's something very weird. The females can grow to 2 meters, right, which is probably taller than your mum and dad, but the males, they only grow to 2.5 centimeters, the size of a walnut. That's the difference between the males and the females in the blanket octopus. How mind-blowing is that? And this is the coolest part, right? The octopus is immune to the venom of the Portuguese man-o'-war jellyfish. Now, we've spoken about that beast on Dangerous Dan before because it's one of the most deadly around. It's not just immune to its stings, but it uses it for itself. They rip the tentacles off the jellyfish, they wrap them around their own arms, and they swing them around, they punch with them. It's like fighting nunchucks, weapons swooshing through the sea. And just think of the evolution, the science, through generations, through thousands of years of this octopus that has led to that moment which they do that. And that means, because of that stupidly smart science, it means the blanket octopus goes straight onto our Dangerous Dan list. And for this week's Battle of the Sciences, we are looking at wildlife, creatures, beasts and animals from all around the world. And the big question is, what do we know about them? And how do we know what we know? We can find out more with Dr. Jacqueline Boyd from Nottingham Trent University. Jacqueline, thank you for joining us. You have 1 minute to tell us why animal sciences is the greatest science ever. That minute starts in 3, 2, 1, go!
So animal science is definitely the best science because it actually encompasses a lot of other sciences. It also means that you can learn lots about animals, and that might be animals, farm animals, it might be pet animals, it might be animals that live in the wild. We can learn all about how they live their lives, the environment in which they live. We can learn about what to feed them. We can learn aspects about their health and their welfare, and even down to things like training your dog or maybe looking after your pet cat or your rabbit. All of these things are encompassed in terms of animal science, and that's why it's such an exciting science, because it doesn't matter if you like genetics and you like real sort of small cellular stuff, or you like whole animals and you're really interested in whole animals. There's something in animal science for everyone, and if you like animals, it ticks that box as well.
There you go. Well, Jacqueline, thank you so much. I'm amazed and really interested in the amount of different sciences that you've mentioned you can really focus on under the big umbrella of animal sciences. So from all of those things, from genetics, from training, from like microbiology, what's your favourite type of science with animals to really look into?
So I originally trained as a zoologist, so I was very much interested in the science of animals generally. And actually, one of my real interests there was actually parasitology, so looking at parasites, which are very small animals. But I'm really interested in how these small animals live either on or in other animals. So that's one aspect of my real interest of animal science.
And as an animal scientist, I imagine you probably like every animal, but is that the same for parasites? They are a type of animal, but they're parasites. Is there any good qualities to them?
There are, yes. Parasites get a really tough deal, and we sort of view parasites as being horrible and disease-causing, and granted, some of them do cause really nasty diseases. But actually, parasites have been really important for evolution, and they've been really important for the evolution of lots of species. So we can learn a lot about us and other animals by looking at parasites. And I do have a favourite parasite.
Well, next question. What's your favourite parasite?
So my favourite parasite is a nematode. So that's a roundworm parasite. And it's called Trichinella spiralis. So it's called Trichinella spiralis because it insists in muscle tissue, and it forms a little spiral in muscle tissue. Really fascinating parasite.
The next one. Why is it your favourite parasite?
So it's my favourite parasite because I studied it for quite a long time. It's also a parasite that is actually sometimes a problem in certain species of animals. So it has historically been a health problem for some species of animals, as well as humans. There's some really nice evidence that Trichinella has been found in Egyptian mummies and in other kind of artifacts as well. So we've got a long history of Trichinella, and that's one of the reasons I like it. But I'm also interested in it because of the health issues it can potentially cause to animals, because I'm fascinated by animals generally, and I want to make sure animals are healthy, they're well, they're fit. So understanding a bit about the parasites that might cause illness helps us understand how to keep animals healthy too.
And way back when you started, did you kind of go into your career because you were mad keen on science, or because you really loved animals and you just wanted a way to work in their world and help them out?
Mad keen on animals. I've always been absolutely mad keen on animals. I grew up always saying I was going to work with rabbits, ironically. And that then morphed into work with horses. And now my main work is actually around dogs. And I work a lot with canine science. So I do a lot of dog training, teach a lot about dog behavior and nutrition, parasitology in dogs, various other things. But actually during my undergraduate degree, I had some fantastic lecturers who got me very interested in parasites and how they impacted on the health of the animals I was interested in.
In your time working in animal sciences, what's been the most mind-blowing discovery that you've stumbled across and learnt through?
Oh, that's a really good question. The problem is, I'm kind of thinking there's lots of really exciting things that have actually happened. And it's one of these sciences that almost weekly something pops up. And I think, wow, that's amazing. That's really exciting. I think right now, some of the really interesting stuff that pops up is actually learning about how animals think, and us starting to understand an awful lot about the thought processes in animals and how we can then understand animals. So I think right now, the really exciting thing I'm looking at and I'm teaching my students about is sort of the emotional life of animals, and the fact that animals are fundamentally experiencing the world often in the same way that we are. So they have thoughts, feelings, fears, lots of other emotions. That's a really exciting area that I think is growing now, and we're learning lots more about. But there's other oddities that I get really excited about. There's a parasitology situation whereby parasites release substances when they're inside their hosts. So the animals that they inhabit, or even the plants they inhabit, the parasites then release substances that can change the behavior of the animal that they're inside. And things like that, I think, is just fascinating. So it links to lots of other really interesting areas of animal science.
And just throwing you forward decades, whenever it is you stop like working, what's the one thing you would really love to discover in the world of animal sciences? What's the one question that you really want answered?
I think I'd like to know exactly what animals think of us, to know what animals think we do and how we react with animals and how we interact with animals. I'd love to really get into an animal's head and really understand how they see us and what they think of us.
I have a cat, Tiggy, the terror tabby, and I once heard that she doesn't think I'm her owner. She just kind of thinks I'm another cat. Is that true?
Potentially, or a servant. If she's cats very much view their people, I think, as servants, much more so than dogs. But we assume this, and it would be really nice to actually, understand what animals really think. I have dogs, and I sometimes see my dogs looking at me, thinking, "Oh, what is she doing now?"
Well, there you go. Animal Sciences is that top of our Battle of the Sciences leaderboard. It's for you to decide. Dr. Jacqueline Boyd, thank you for joining us. Thank you very much to Jackie for coming on the show, talking to us all about pets and what they're really thinking. We can learn more about that now, actually, with an episode from Professor Pulsar and his Space Explanation series. Professor Pulsar is a genius. He knows everything about space, the galaxy, the universe around us. He's one of our favourites as well. We dive into his series every now and then. And this week, we're finding out all about whether pets can really go to space and who has actually been up there.
Somewhere between Polaris and Ursa Minor, just a glint in the night sky to the naked eye. But look a little closer, and you will see it is Professor Pulsar's exploration craft, the Intrepid 5, piloted by trusted Captain T. Torrey. While the pupils of Deep Space High take their school holidays, Pulsar is roaming the universe to explore the most dastardly difficult mysteries of space and broadcasting his findings back to the planets. It can only be another episode of Professor Pulsar's Space Explanation Service.
Captain T. Torrey! Where are you? Captain!
Oh, sorry, Professor. Didn't hear you. I was listening to some music by my favourite band, the Quasar Chiefs. They're ace.
I'm sure they are, T. Torrey, but that doesn't help us with solving any more space questions. Why don't you see if you can find us another fantastic question?
I could dispatch the data scoops and see if I can troll something up.
Yes, but hurry up. We want to see what is out there.
Here comes one now, Professor.
Can pets go to space?
Oh, good one. Computer, I think we need some expert help on this one. Do you think you could sniff someone out?
Target acquired. Centering in on Swindon, England on planet Earth. It looks like somewhere called the UK Space Agency. Loading file. The UK Space Agency is the organisation that represents the UK space industry to the rest of the world. They are involved in a huge range of projects from across the UK, including getting the next Briton into space, Tim Peake. He will launch next year on a mission called Principia.
These chaps seem to know their stuff. Who exactly are we speaking to?
My name's Andrew Koo. I work for the UK Space Agency. My job title is Human Spaceflight and Microgravity Programme Manager.
And Andrew, do you know if pets can go into space?
They can. I'm not sure you'd want to take your pet to space because it's not a very nice environment necessarily for an animal to be in. In fact, we launched animals before we launched humans into space just to test. There's Laika, the Russian dog, was a celebrity in the Soviet Union. Iran recently have been launching monkeys into space. So there's no physical reason not to launch animals into space, but there's always an ethical dimension to these things. So you'd want to think long and hard before taking your pet with you because they might not enjoy it as much as you do.
Interesting, yes. I guess because you can't explain what's going on to an animal, they might find it a bit scary going to space. Thanks for clearing that up, Andrew. Now, T. Torrey, while we have a communications channel open with the UK Space Agency, do you have any more questions that they may be able to help with?
Hold on, Professor. Let me see what I can find. How about this one? I think it will be right up their street.
How many people have been to space before?
Expert identified. Connecting.
My name is Libby Jackson. I work for the UK Space Agency.
Hi, Libby. Do you happen to know how many people have been to space before?
It's about 500 astronauts from lots of different countries. The big ones, of course, are America and Russia. But Europe have sent people into space, Canada have sent people into space, Japan have sent people into space, and China. So people from all over the world have been into space.
I see. And in terms of the UK, how many British people have been into space?
Well, the first Britain in space was a lady called Helen Sharman. She went to the Mir space station, which was a Russian space station, in 1991. Since then, there have been some other people who were born in Britain who went into space, but they moved to America and they went up with NASA, so they had American flags on their arms. There have been some space tourists and people who are paying to go into space. Sarah Brightman, who is a famous singer, will be going to visit the International Space Station as a space tourist next year, a little bit before Tim Peake gets there. So Tim Peake is our first government-supported astronaut. He will also be our first long-duration astronaut. So he's going to go and stay on the International Space Station for 6 months. So he'll launch at the end of November next year, and then he's going to live and work in space. He's really looking forward to sharing his experience with everybody. And so you should look out for him on Facebook, on Twitter, on the television. He's going to be doing all sorts of things.
Excellent stuff, Libby. I think I quite fancy a trip to the International Space Station myself. Captain T-Torre, plot a course to Earth, and we can be there in time for tea.
Very good, Professor. Firing thrusters.
Professor Pulsar's Space Explanation Service, with support from the UK Space Agency. Continue your space exploration at funkidslive.com/deepspacehigh.
You can hear more from Professor Pulsar and his journeys around the galaxy wherever you're listening to this. Just search for it where you get your shows. If you have a question that you'd love to ask me next week on the podcast, make sure you leave it as a voice note on the free Fun Kids app or at funkidslive.com. Fun Kids, we have loads of brilliant podcasts series all about science, all about books. They're on Google, Apple, Spotify. They're on our app and they're on the Fun Kids website too. And Fun Kids, we're our children's radio station from the UK. Listen all over the country on our app at funkidslive.com, and if you've got a smart speaker, wake it up and ask it to play Fun Kids.